Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Lucard, and I am an HMIS System Administrator for Montgomery County. In today's training, we are going to look at the relationship to the head of household question and why it is absolutely vital that you answer this question on every single client that you have, whether they are in a household or whether they are an individual. This question is so important because if you don't answer it or you answer it incorrectly, that client will not show up correctly in any of the reports that determine your funding or your NOFA ranking. This includes your APR, and this is also the best place for you to catch those errors. So again, in today's training, we're going to show you where the question is and show you what happens when you mess it up. So let's go in. We're going to go first here to George Jetson. We're already in him. We don't have to do a search. We're going to go to his entry exit. We're going to go to project start date. And of course, we're doing a household here, but the same principles apply whether you're doing a household or a family. We're doing a household simply because it's easier to mess up a household, and so we can show you more mistakes that can be made. So let's take a look. This is the question. As soon as you enter your project start date or your entry, whatever you want to call it, the relationship to head of household is the first question on your screen. Why? Because it is so vitally important for your reports to run correctly. And we can see here we've got self, head of household's child, head of household's spouse, head of household's other relation, non-relation member, and of course the answer we never want to use, data not collected. You need to answer for every member of the family what their relationship is to the head of the household. There can only be one head of the household. There cannot be more, there cannot be less. If you have 0 heads of the household, you're going to get an error, your reports aren't going to run correctly, your family will not count as being served. This is going to mess up your occupancy. This is going to mess up your capacity. This is going to mess up all of your reports. So you have to answer this. One member of the family must be the head of the household, and everyone else must answer this question in relationship to that family member. So again, we're in George Jetson here. We've marked him as the head of the household. He should be the only one that is self. And from there, we would go into each member of the family by clicking on them, Astro, Elroy, Jane, and Judy, and seeing how they are. So let's click on Elroy quick. And we can see under Elroy, it's answered correctly because he's the head of the household's child. Elroy is the son of George, right? Astro, we have listed the head of the household's child, even though in the cartoon he's a dog. But in the purposes of doing this pretend for HMIS purposes, we'll say he's a child. You could also change it to non-relation member of the family if you wanted to. We normally wouldn't put dogs in HMIS, but hey, this is just for show. And again, we want to make sure that every member of the family is coded correctly, right? This question is so vital. I can't emphasize it enough. You need to make sure you answer it. Montgomery County is going to have a 0 tolerance policy on this question, meaning you must have 100% accuracy in this question. Because if you don't, again, your entire household won't count. And that's going to damage your NOFA ranking. That's going to damage your APR when you upload it to Sage. That's going to damage your profile when you have to bill if you're doing a HIP family program or a HIP individual program, because you will not be able to count this person if you do not have this question answered. So please, please, please always answer the head of the household question. Now, let's take a look at the APR and what happens when you mess it up. All right. Normally we'd have to code for an APR, but that's a completely different training. So I'm going to have one that I've already queued up already, and let's take a look at it. So here we go. Let's take a look at where errors are. In this case, I know that we have 2 families in rapid rehousing family HSP Catholic Charities. One of the families is the Jetsons, and one of the families is the Test family. And if we take a look, number of persons served, hey, look, there we go. There's the 5 members of the Jetsons and the 2 members of the Test. That's great. 3 adults and 4 children. That's right. Right. And we keep on looking through. And then we get to here. Number of adult heads of household, 1. There must be 1 head of household for every family. So what we know right here is that something's wrong. We can see instantly that there's a problem. 1 entire family out of the 2 this program is serving is not counting. That's going to cut your occupancy and capacity in half, just right there if you only have 2 families. So again, it's so important. And again, we only have 1 adult head of household. There needs to be 1 for every family. So what's going on here? What that means is that the relationship of the head of the household question is either not answered or it's not answered correctly. So we're going to have to go in and fix this. Section 6B is going to help you find those errors. There's this relationship to head of household question. As you can see, 3 of the 7 members of the families have a household error. 43% of the 7 members of the family, 43% of them have an error in their relationship to the head of household. That's not good. So we need to fix these. That's one thing we want to stop, drop, and start fixing, right? Because that means 3 people aren't going to count as being served. And let's take a look. As always with the APR, if we click on the blue number, right? Oops, I can click back. Sorry about that. As always, if we click on the blue number, it's going to show you where our errors are. Judy Judson has an error, Sarah Test, and Tim Test. Both members of the Test families have an error. So let's go in and remember we want to fix these. Another place where an error is going to happen is going to be in sections like this. Number of households served. Total households 1. Because there's only one person family with a correctly coded head of household, only one of your 2 families for this program is going to count. So now imagine that you're a program that serves 30 families and only one person has it. That's 29 families that aren't going to count. So you have to get this relationship to the household question. You have to answer it. You have to answer it right away, and you have to answer it correctly. Or again, it's not going to count in sections like 8A or any section that counts a household. If you do not answer the head of the household question correctly or at all, that family will not count in your APR, which means it will not count for SAGE. It will not count for your NOFA. It will not count at all. It's as if your work doesn't count. They don't count. They're in the void. So you have to get them in. Anything that counts households, you need that. And again, that's true not only for families, but for individuals, because they are a household of 1. Every individual should have self-answered for relationship to head of household, or they will not count. Now, let's go in and take a look at the errors for the clients. We're going to go back to client point, right? Oh, and we know that Judy Judson's one of them that has an error. So let's go in and see what her error is, right? Project start date, save and continue, scroll on down, and here we go. She doesn't have her relationship to head of the household answered at all. So that's why she's coming up with an error. However, because one member of the family does have it entered, at least that's showing up correctly. Remember, one person in the family needs to have their relationship to the head of the household answered as self, but every member needs to have it answered. Every member that does not have it answered is going to show up in that error section in the APR. So all you have to do is fix this, right? Daughter Judy. So we're going to do head of the household, child. We hit save and exit. And it wants us to answer all these other questions. And this brings us to the important point here. A lot of times, this question is not answered in the children or spouse or other family members because you have to answer all of these questions. And you might not have all the answers right away. And so a case manager will go, I'll get back to it. They don't get back to it. You don't get back to it. That's why this happens. So you need to make sure you have all of those answers for every single one of the family members when you do the intake. We want to try and get these in. You can come back and answer these later, but as we will see repeatedly when we run reports or audits on programs, programs don't come back and answer these questions. So we can see, look at all this that needs to be answered. And it won't let us get out of here unless we answer all of these questions. So let's say we have the information here because we're fixing her lack of information. So we're just going to say, oh, no, she doesn't have any disabling conditions. She's a teenager. Prior living situation. I know that dad's was that they owned without a subsidy and then something happened. So I'm going to put that back in. They were there for a year or more. Income from any source? No, because she's a teenager. She's not working. She's a child. And so we can easily fill all this out. Now, if this happens to you in real life, you should have some sort of paperwork or some sort of intake packet that gives you all of this information. So you're going to want to fill this out. You need to transmit everything from the paper copy or the intake sheet that you have and put it here into HMIS. We're just going to say, yeah, let's give her medication. So again, one of the big reasons this question doesn't get answered is because there's so many mandatory questions, and a lot of people either don't have the information for the children when they first come to the family, or they don't even bother to look at the children and spouse information. And so these questions never get answered. But it's vitally important that you do answer all of these. We hit save. We can save and exit from her account, and now she's fixed. So there, it was just a matter of it being blank, and we could see why, because the case manager never filled in their information for whatever reason. Usually with the children, it's because they don't have all the demographical information when they come into the program. Usually it's just the head of the household and maybe the spouse. And in this case, they just never came back and filled it out. You are still responsible for it. And every question that is not filled out in a family member, whether they're 2 years old or 26, will ding you if you don't answer it. And it will lower your rating in the SAGE, it will lower your rating in the NOFA. So every question you want to try and get answered, even if it's a child and you don't have the information right away. Maybe it takes you a couple months, you still got to get that information in. So let's go take a look now at the test. Okay. Let's go take a look. There's Sarah and Tim. So let's see what happened here with Sarah and Tim. So we can see here, Sarah is the head of the household, spouse, or partner, and she's the only adult in this family. All right. And Tess is the head of the household, child. So we can see here that neither one is marked as self. We have 2 members of a family entered into this program, but neither one is marked as self, and that's why they're both coming up as an error. If you don't have a self, every single member of the family is going to show up as an error because they're not in the system. So let's take a look here. We can see that there is a Tom George test who's listed as head of the household as self here in the households tab, but for whatever reason, he's missing from the actual family that was entered. So what we need to do as a case manager, program director, whatever your title is figure out where the error is. Is Tom George test no longer a member of this family? Or did they just forget to put Tom George in when they entered him into your program? In this case, let's say they just forgot to add Tom George. In that case, all we would have to do is include additional household members, put him in, make sure he had the same start date as the rest of the family. If he did, we hit save and continue, and we're all fixed. And we can look, and if we look at Tom, there he is as self, head of the household. And that should fix our problem, right? Except for that missing interim, which we'll have to do for him, but that's okay. Now, if the reverse is true, and it turned out that Tom was no longer a member of the family, we would have to edit the household, and we'd have to set up Sarah as the new head of the household, and then we would have just changed Sarah's account from spouse to the head of the household as self. So there's a couple different ways this one could go, and I just wanted to make sure you were aware of it. It's not always a cut and dry answer, as we've seen with both of these. But now that we've made the fix, let's go back in and look at that APR. We're going to rerun the APR, pick our provider, which is HSP Families. Here we go, it's family. We're going to do a program start date, the same date the test was run, or the original report was run, 06/21/2021. We're going to choose HUD, and then we'll hit build report. Now, why don't we just go look at the report we made before? And that's because, like everything else in HMIS that's a interim based, this is going to show you what the report looked like at 6/21, June 21st, 2021, on 10:57 in the morning. It's now 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's not going to show any of the changes we just made in the past few minutes. It's going to show you what the report looked like at that exact date timestamp. This is the same thing with interims. And that's why it's so important that once you make corrections, you rerun the APR because it works in real time. We want to see what the report looks like now. Let's hit build report. Wait for it to load. Sometimes it takes a little bit. There we go. And now look, because we added Tom George test, we're back up to 8. And look, we've fixed the head of the household. We've got 2 adult head of households here. Tom George and George Jetson, double Georges. We can go down here. Look at that. 0 errors in the relationship to the head of the household. And because Judy was missing all that information, like the client location disabling condition, we have cleaned that up by fixing it here. Look at that. That's great. Now, of course, there's still some errors like with social security numbers. We can see Elroy and Tom George have some errors. And one client has an ethnicity error, George Jetson. So we still have to clean those guys up. But again, we're only doing the relationship to the head of the household in this training. And as far as that's concerned, we are batting 1,000 because we have no errors. We go back down here to questions like 8A. And now that family is finally showing up as a household being served. Again, if you do not answer the relationship to head of the household question, that family will not count as being served. That's going to affect your occupancy rate. That's going to affect your capacity rate. That's going to affect your NOFA, your SAGE, this entire APR report. You have to answer that question. I cannot strongly emphasize that enough. You got to answer that question or bad things will happen to your program. So please, anytime you see a relationship to head of household error, make sure you stop what you're doing and fix that error. Every single person with an HMIS account should be running the APR at least once a month. The agency admin should probably be running it once a week and then relaying errors to the staff. And if you keep doing that, you're going to have your error ratio down to 0%, 100% data quality in no time. That's all we've got for this training today. I hope you join us back for some more trainings. Thank you for your time. You have a great day.